All right, ready to dive deep into the world of the FCPA, the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. It can feel like a legal maze, but stick with us and we'll guide you through.
Sounds good to me.
Let's set the scene. Okay, imagine a company. They're going global, right? Got their product, awesome strategy, ready to celebrate, but wait. There's this legal minefield they got to navigate first, the FCPA.
Yeah.
And tripping up, that can be a disaster.
Yeah, you're talking massive fines, legal battles that could go on forever, a reputation that's, well, shattered.
So what is the FCPA all about? Basically, it's the U.S. saying, hey, we want fair play out there, no bribing your way to the top. It's all about making sure companies don't use shady tactics to get business overseas.
And it's not just American companies that have to pay attention. Any company with U.S. ties, whether it's on a U.S. stock exchange or even just has American employees, they got to follow these rules.
So it's a pretty wide net.
Wide net.
And it really boils down to two main parts, the anti-bribery stuff and then the accounting provisions. Let's tackle the anti-bribery side first. Sounds simple on the surface. No bribing foreign officials. But here's the thing. The FCPA, it gets kind of specific about these key terms.
Oh, yeah, you're totally right. The term foreign official, it's way broader than people think. We're not just talking, presidents, prime ministers, that kind of thing. It includes anyone working for a government-owned company or even controlled by the government, political party officials. Think about it. Even someone like a doctor at a state-run hospital.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
And we're not talking just slipping cash under the table, right? This anything of value can get pretty surprising. I read about a company, they got in trouble for offering internships to a foreign official's kids. Talk about, I don't know, creative thinking or just really bad judgment.
Perfect example. It's not just money. It's anything that could be seen as, improperly influencing a decision. So gifts, fancy trips, even charitable donations, if they're done to get a business advantage.
So it all comes down to intent then.
Absolutely. It's the corrupt intent that really matters.
Yeah.
Did you offer that gift because you were being genuinely nice? Or was it a calculated move, like you said, to grease the wheels? That's what investigators want to know.
So how does a company prove its intent? They can't just say, oh, we didn't mean to bribe anyone.
Right, right. That's where those accounting provisions come in. It's like the FCPA's financial watchdog, you could say. Companies got to keep your books clean, transparent accounting. Got to be able to stand up to scrutiny.
So, no more. My dog ate my homework. You need a paper trail, everything above board.
Exactly. And they also need internal controls, right? To prevent bribery from even happening in the first place. Think of it as a checks and balances system. No unauthorized payments, no cooking the books.
Now, there are some tricky areas in the FCPA, right? Like facilitating payments. Lots of debate about what's okay and what's not.
Yeah. Facilitating payments. Those small fees, to speed up routine government stuff. Permits, getting things through customs, that kind of thing. They're a gray area. Some people say, hey, it's just the cost of doing business. Others, they see it as a slippery slope to bigger bribes.
So how's a company supposed to navigate that? What questions should they be asking?
The key is intent and context. Is this payment truly just to speed up something routine? Or is it to get an unfair advantage? And are these payments, are they like normal in that country? Or are they red flags? It's tough. Companies, they often need to get expert advice just to be sure.
It sounds like understanding the FCPA, it's not just about the law, it's about the culture where you're doing business.
You got it. It's not a one-size-fits-all thing. Companies, they have to adjust their compliance to their specific risks, the specific place they're working.
Okay, let's talk compliance then. What are the steps companies take to avoid becoming the next big headline, the next scandal?
Well, first, know the scope of the law. Does the FCPA even apply to your business? Any connections to the U.S. market? And then, got to do a risk assessment, a thorough one.
So like scouting the terrain before you set up camp.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You got to figure out where your operations, they intersect with the FCPA, working in high-risk countries, ones known for corruption. Are you working with third parties who might be dealing with foreign officials? Understanding your risks, that's the foundation of a good compliance program.
Okay, so you've scouted the terrain, you've seen the potential danger zones. What's next? How do you actually deal with those risks?
Strong policies and procedures. It's not enough to just say, hey, don't bribe anyone. You need clear rules, right? A playbook for ethical behavior. Everyone in the company knows it, follows it.
So a rule book for ethical behavior.
Right. These policies, they're going to define what a bribe is, what gifts and entertainment are okay, how to deal with those facilitating payment situations we talked about.
But just having a policy, that's not enough, right? You got to make sure people are actually following the rules.
Absolutely. That's where internal controls come in. Systems to prevent unauthorized payments. Flag anything suspicious. Make sure everything is, above board. It's like having that financial watchdog we talked about.
So you've got your risk assessment, your policies, your internal controls. What about those third parties we mentioned earlier? The agents, the distributors, the consultants, the people who are often out there interacting with foreign officials for you.
Third-party due diligence. That's a critical piece of the FCPA puzzle.
Hmm.
You got to vet your business partners carefully, especially the ones interacting with foreign officials.
Mm-hmm.
Understand their business practices, make sure they have a clean record, and that they're committed to, doing things ethically.
So it's not enough to keep your own house clean. You got to make sure your business partners are keeping their houses clean too.
Exactly. And a key part of that is safeguards in your contracts with them.
Right.
To audit their books, make sure they're following the rules. You want your commitment to ethical behavior. It needs to extend to your whole network.
Okay, so we've got risk assessment, policies and procedures, internal controls, third-party due diligence, anything else.
Training. You can have all those things in place, but if your employees don't get it, you're still at risk.
Makes sense. People need to know the rules and how to apply them, right? Not just in theory, but in real situations.
You got it. And training, it's not a one-time thing. It's ongoing, and it needs to be tailored to what your employees do. Sales, marketing, procurement, those folks are often the ones out there, so they need to be FCPA savvy.
And what if, even with all the training, an employee sees something that seems off? Who do they tell?
You need a clear reporting system, a whistleblower hotline, an online thing, even just a specific person in the company. The point is, employees need to feel safe speaking up if something's not right.
Creating a culture of transparency.
Absolutely. And remember, the FCPA, it protects whistleblowers. Retaliation, that's a no-go. Companies need to protect the people who raise concerns, not punish them.
Okay, we've talked a lot about prevention, but what about detection? How do companies make sure they catch potential violations before they become huge problems?
Monitoring and auditing. Regular checkups, that's key. Reviewing financial records, payments, contracts, all that. Looking for anything that could be an FCPA violation.
So it's not enough to set up the system, you have to make sure it's working.
Right. Proactive, not reactive. Look for those red flags. Don't wait for a whistleblower, or, even worse, for the authorities to show up.
All right, so we've got risk assessment, policies, controls, due diligence, training, reporting systems, monitoring, and auditing. That's a pretty comprehensive program. But what if, despite all that, a company messes up, violates the FCPA?
Well, that's when things get serious. The consequences, they can be huge. We're talking massive fines, legal battles that drag on, and your reputation. Well, that could be almost impossible to fix. And we're seeing more and more that individuals, they can face personal liability too.
High stakes.
Very high. That's why companies have to take this seriously. It's not just about staying out of legal trouble. It's about doing business the right way, building trust, having a good reputation globally.
It's about ethics, not just ticking boxes.
Exactly. When you have that strong ethical foundation, compliance, it's not a burden, it's just how you do business.
Well, I feel way more informed about the FCPA now. We covered a lot in this first part of our deep dive, but we've only just started.
Oh, there's so much more to explore. And in the next part, we're going to get into some real-world examples.
I'm looking forward to that. Stay with us, everyone, for part 2. We'll explore some really fascinating case studies. It'll bring the FCPA to life, and you'll see just how high the stakes can get.
Should be interesting. Welcome back to our deep dive into the FCPA.
It's great to be back. We got a really good overview of the FCPA landscape last time, talked about the anti-bribery and accounting provisions, all those tricky definitions, and what companies need to do to build a strong compliance program.
Yeah, we covered a lot, but sometimes, the best way to understand something is to see it in action. Look at real examples of how the FCPA actually plays out.
Absolutely. So let's get into some cases where, unfortunately, companies found themselves on the wrong side of the FCPA.
All right, let's start with one that really shook things up globally, the Siemens scandal.
Siemens. The German industrial giant, Siemens.
That's the one. Back in the early 2000s, Siemens got caught in this massive bribery scheme. Multiple countries, billions of dollars in shady payments.
Billions. with a B. That's not just a mistake, that's a whole other
It
level.
was huge. Siemens, they were basically using bribery as a business strategy, paying off government officials all over the world to win contracts,
Right.
power plants, telecom equipment, you name it.
So they were buying their way to the top, no fair competition, just like straight up cash under the table.
Pretty much. And remember, we talked about anything of value. Well, Siemens, they were using this slush fund, funneling money through shell companies to bribe officials. They even created fake consulting contracts to hide the payments.
Wow, that's a lot of work just to cover their tracks. I guess when you're playing at that level, you got to get creative with your accounting, huh?
Sadly, yeah, that's often how it goes in these big bribery schemes. But this one got exposed, and it all started with a whistleblower.
The whistleblower. It seems like they're often the key to bringing these things to light.
They really are. In this case, a former Siemens employee came forward with evidence. And from there, things just unraveled.
So what happened to Siemens after they got caught? I imagine the consequences were pretty serious.
Oh, they were. In 2008, Siemens agreed to pay $800 million in fines to the U.S. and Germany, one of the biggest FCPA settlements ever at the time.
Ouch, that's gotta hurt, even for a company as big as Siemens.
It did, big time. And beyond the money, their reputation took a major hit, tarnished their image, led to big changes in management.
It really shows you FCPA violations, it's not just about paying a fine. The consequences go way beyond that.
Absolutely. Siemens, it's a classic example of how a culture of corruption, it can infect a whole organization and lead to disaster. Shows you need strong leadership, real commitment to ethics, and a compliance program that's like baked into the company.
Okay, so that's one big case, but let's talk about a company everyone knows, Walmart. What happened with their operations in Mexico?
Walmart. That was interesting, brings up subsidiary liability. Early 2010s allegations came out that Walmart de Mexico, their subsidiary, was bribing Mexican officials, expediting permits, getting a leg up on the competition.
So not Walmart directly, but their Mexican subsidiary. Does that even matter for the FCPA?
It does. Under the FCPA, parent companies can be held responsible for what their subsidiaries do, even if they weren't directly involved. It's called successor liability.
So no hiding behind the corporate structure. Interesting.
Right. The FCPA, it really makes it clear companies need to own what their subsidiaries do, especially in risky places.
Makes sense. So what happened with Walmart? Did they end up with consequences like Siemens?
Well, it's still ongoing, but they've already spent hundreds of millions of dollars just on investigations and compliance improvements, revamping their program, tighter controls, more due diligence, especially with third parties.
Wow, so even the investigation is expensive, and they're doing all this to avoid potentially bigger fines later.
Exactly. It's like pay now or pay more later. And in this case, later could be way more painful.
It shows you the price of non-compliance. It's not just about the fines. Legal fees, your reputation, and just the disruption to your business, it all adds up.
You got it. And Walmart, it shows how important proactive monitoring is. If they'd been watching their subsidiary more closely, they might have caught this earlier and saved themselves a lot of trouble.
Okay, so we've got Siemens, Walmart, two huge cases, big consequences. Any examples that might be, I don't know, more relatable to smaller companies, ones that don't involve billions of dollars or global operations?
Definitely. Let's talk about Paradigm Biodevices.
Paradigm Biodevices. I'm not familiar with them.
They weren't a household name like the others. Paradigm, they were a medical device company, mostly working in China.
Okay, so what got them in trouble with the FCPA?
They were bribing Chinese healthcare providers to use their products.
So not government officials this time, but healthcare providers. I thought the FCPA was all about government corruption.
Right, the focus is on government, but remember how broad that foreign official definition is. It includes anyone doing a public function, even if they aren't on the government payroll.
Oh, that's right. We talked about that. So these healthcare providers, they were considered foreign officials because they worked for state-run hospitals.
Exactly. This case shows that the FCPA, it applies to any industry that deals with foreign governments or state-owned entities, even ones you might not think of right away, like healthcare.
So even in healthcare, companies got to be careful, especially in countries where the government's really involved in the healthcare system.
For sure. And Paradigm, they highlight another thing. They weren't a huge multinational, relatively small company, but they still face serious consequences.
So it's not just the big guys who have to worry about the FCPA.
Nope, not at all. Applies to all sizes, and the penalties, they can be just as bad for a small company.
Okay, so we've looked at Siemens, Walmart, and Paradigm. Different industries, different sizes. What are the big lessons here? What should companies learn from this to avoid making the same mistakes?
The biggest takeaway, don't mess around with the FCPA. The consequences are real, and they can be devastating to your finances, your reputation, everything.
So no cutting corners, no thinking you can get away with it.
No way. Enforcement agencies, they're active, they're getting better all the time. They're using data analysis to find suspicious stuff. They're working together across borders. It's getting harder to slip through the cracks.
Okay, take it seriously. What else?
Bribery comes in many forms. It's not always suitcases full of cash. Gifts, trips, entertainment, even donations, hiring decisions.
Yeah.
Anything can be bribery if it's done with corrupt intent.
So be on guard for anything that could look like you're trying to influence a foreign official. Be extra careful in those gray areas.
Absolutely. And it's not just what you do, it's how you record it. Keep things clear, transparent, so you can show that everything was legitimate.
Makes sense. Anything else?
This one we've talked about, but it's crucial. A strong compliance program, it's not optional. It's essential.
Right, we talked about that. Policies, procedures, controls. But it's also about that culture of compliance, right? Everyone understands the rules, feels okay speaking up if something's wrong.
Exactly. And these cases really show how important training is. Having ways for people to report things and doing that due diligence on third parties.
So compliance can't just be on paper. It has to be how the company actually operates. Part of their DNA, you could say.
You got it. Companies have to walk the walk, not just talk the talk.
Yeah.
And they got to be constantly checking their programs, finding ways to improve, because the FCPA landscape, it's always changing.
It's an ongoing thing, not a one-time fix.
Exactly. FCPA compliance, it's a journey, not a destination.
Okay, we've seen the dark side of the FCPA, the cases where things went wrong. But there are companies out there doing things right, setting the standard, proving that ethical behavior is good for business too.
You're right. It's easy to focus on the bad stuff, but there are companies out there who are great examples.
I'd love to hear about them. Who's leading the way in FCPA compliance?
One company that's often mentioned is Microsoft.
Microsoft, the
Yeah.
tech giant, Microsoft.
Yep. They've really put in the work to build a top-notch compliance program. And it shows.
What makes them so special? What are they doing that others aren't?
Well, they've got this risk-based approach. They focus on the areas where they're most likely to have FCPA problems, mapped out their global operations, figured out the high-risk countries and activities, and tailored their program accordingly.
So they're being strategic, not just throwing money at compliance randomly.
Right. And training is a big priority for them. All employees, engineers, salespeople, everyone, they get regular FCPA training. And they use interesting methods to make sure people remember. No more boring PowerPoints. They use interactive scenarios, case studies, even games to make it more engaging.
That's smart. It makes the FCPA more real, shows people how it applies to their jobs. Way better than just lecturing people about the law.
Yeah, for sure. And another thing Microsoft does well is third-party due diligence. They have a strict vetting process, especially for those dealing with foreign governments. They really dig deep, check financials, backgrounds, the whole 9 yards.
So they're doing their homework, not just trusting blindly.
Right. And finally, they're actively monitoring their program. Regular audits to look for weak spots, areas to improve. They're constantly adjusting their program to make sure it's working as well as it can.
So it's always evolving, always getting better.
Yep. Microsoft's program, it's a living thing, always adapting to the global marketplace. And their success shows that a good compliance program can be an advantage, not just a cost.
Pretty impressive. Any other companies up there setting a high bar?
Another one is Google. They've made ethics a core part of their culture. You see that in their FCPA compliance too.
Google, the search engine Google. What's so different about what they're doing?
Well, like Microsoft, they've got that risk-based approach, focusing where they're most vulnerable. But what sets them apart is their focus on transparency and open communication. Employees feel safe to speak up, and there's a strong system for investigating and addressing any issues.
So they're not just relying on rules, but they're encouraging their employees to be the watchdogs.
Exactly. It's about ownership and accountability at every level. And they're also using their tech expertise. They've got these data tools to monitor transactions, flag suspicious activity, catch potential problems early.
So they're using their tech skills not just to build cool products, but to improve their compliance. That's awesome.
It is. Shows that FCPA compliance doesn't have to be a drag. It can be a chance to be innovative and create a more ethical business.
Okay, we've got Microsoft, Google, two tech giants leading the way. Any examples from other industries?
Let's look at Johnson & Johnson from the pharmaceutical world. They've been known for their ethics for a long time, and their FCPA program reflects that.
Johnson & Johnson, the big healthcare company. Makes sense that they'd take ethics seriously. They've got a long history and a reputation for caring.
You're right. Ethical behavior is part of who they are. One thing they do is regular training for all employees, focused on the specific risks they face in their jobs. And they have a dedicated compliance team to answer questions, give guidance, help people when things are unclear.
So it's not just about rules, but about giving people the support they need to make good decisions.
Exactly. And they've got a really strong system for third-party due diligence. They know a lot of FCPA problems involve intermediaries, so they're very careful about who they work with.
So they're focusing on their partners, too, making sure everyone understands the ethical standards.
Right. It's all part of their bigger commitment to being a responsible company making a positive impact.
Okay, so Microsoft, Google, Johnson & Johnson, all committed to compliance in their own way. What are the common threads here? What makes these programs work so well?
Well, they all have strong tone from the top. The leadership team makes it clear, ethical behavior, it's not optional. They don't just talk about it, they live it.
So it's not just about having a compliance department, it's about the leaders setting the example.
Exactly. Employees need to see that their leaders are serious about this, that doing things the right way is important, and that they'll hold people accountable.
Okay, that's one. What else?
Another thing, a culture of transparency and open communication. All three companies, they've made it safe for employees to speak up if they see something wrong. They have systems to protect those who come forward.
So people feel empowered to raise issues without being afraid of what will happen to them. They trust that the company will take it seriously.
Exactly. And they all use that risk-based approach we talked about, focusing on where they're most vulnerable. They're being strategic, not just throwing money at the problem.
Smart and efficient, not just spending a lot.
Exactly. And they're all about continuous improvement, always evaluating, looking for ways to be more effective, adapting to the changes in FCPA enforcement.
So it's never done, it's always evolving.
Right. FCPA compliance, it's a journey, and these companies show that it's a journey worth taking.
It's great to see these companies not just complying, but really embracing the idea of ethical business.
I agree. They're showing that doing the right thing, it's not just good ethics, it's good business too.
Okay, we've explored both the risks and the rewards of FCPA compliance. We've seen where companies have made mistakes and where they've succeeded.
Yeah, we've covered a lot.
We have. But before we move on, I want to go back to something we mentioned earlier, whistleblowers.
Ah, yes, whistleblowers. They're often crucial in exposing FCPA violations.
Absolutely. They're the ones who take the risk to speak up. They often face a lot of pressure, personal, professional, but they do it anyway because they want to do the right thing.
It takes a lot of courage. And the FCPA knows that, protects them. Companies can't retaliate against someone for reporting a concern.
So, for anyone out there thinking about blowing the whistle on FCPA violations, what advice would you give them? What should they know?
First thing, document everything. Keep records of anything suspicious. Emails, notes, conversations, dates, names, anything that supports your story.
Create a paper trail.
Exactly. It's hard to prove something if it's just your word against theirs. And second, get legal advice.
Don't try to do it alone. Talk to an expert.
Absolutely. A good lawyer can help you understand your rights, what you can do, and how to protect yourself.
Good advice. Anything else people should know?
Well, be ready for a tough process. Whistleblowing can be really hard, emotionally, and it can impact your personal and professional life. So have a support system, people you can trust.
Surround yourself with people who believe in you, who'll be there for you no matter what.
Exactly. And remember, what you do can make a real difference in fighting corruption. One person can spark a big change, break the silence.
That's a powerful thought. Whistleblowers are so important. They keep companies accountable, make sure the FCPA actually works.
They're vital for a more ethical global economy.
And with that, we'll wrap up part 2 of our FCPA deep dive. Back for the final part of our FCPA deep dive.
It's been quite a journey, hasn't it? Unpacking this law. We've covered the basics, seen how companies messed up, and even, celebrated the ones doing things right.
We have covered a lot, but before we wrap up, I think it's important to, look ahead.
Yeah, good point. Seeing where things are going, it helps us understand where we are now.
Exactly. So what's the future of the FCPA? What should companies be watching out for?
Well, one big trend is individual accountability.
So not just going after companies, but holding the people who actually did the wrong thing responsible.
That's it. It's shifting away from just fines towards criminal charges against executives, employees, whoever was involved in the bribery.
Makes sense. It's people making decisions, authorizing payments, crossing the line.
Exactly. Holding individuals accountable, it sends a message. Bribery, it's serious. There are personal consequences.
Okay, so individual accountability is a big one. What else are we seeing?
Data analytics. It's playing a bigger and bigger role in FCPA investigations.
So big data, it's even changing compliance.
It is. Authorities are using these powerful tools to analyze tons of data, looking for patterns, anything that might point to bribery.
Like a digital detective, right? Finding those clues that might have been missed before.
Exactly. These tools, they can uncover connections, identify red flags, build stronger cases.
So companies can't hide behind complicated transactions and shady accounting anymore.
It's getting harder. Data analytics, it's bringing those things to light.
Okay, so individual accountability, data analytics, anything else.
Globalization of enforcement.
What does that mean? Is the FCPA being adopted by other countries?
Not exactly. It means enforcement agencies around the world are working together more, investigating, prosecuting FCPA violations, more collaboration, sharing information.
So it's not just the U.S. cracking down anymore.
Right. It's becoming a global effort to fight corruption. Closes those loopholes where companies could take advantage of different laws in different countries.
So that's a good thing. Levels the playing field.
Definitely. Creates a more consistent environment for businesses operating internationally.
Okay, individual accountability, data analytics, globalization of enforcement. Any other trends?
The focus on ESG is growing. Environmental, social, and governance factors.
ESG, I hear that everywhere. Investors are paying attention to that now.
They are. Investors and consumers, they want companies to be ethical and sustainable.
And how does that connect to FCPA compliance? Those seem like separate things.
Well, bribery, corruption, they go against ESG principles. A company that's bribing people, they're not being transparent, acting with integrity, and those are key parts of ESG.
I see. So companies that care about ESG have to care about FCPA compliance too.
Yeah, it's all connected.
So it's not just about staying out of trouble legally, it's about attracting investors and customers who care about ethics.
Right. FCPA compliance is becoming more important for a company's image. The ones that show they're ethical, they'll have an advantage.
Okay, so we've got individual accountability, data analytics, globalization of enforcement, and the rise of ESG. The FCPA landscape, it's getting more complex.
It is, but it's also becoming more effective.
Yeah.
Companies have to step up their compliance game.
So that's a good thing.
Definitely. Companies are moving beyond just checking boxes to a more proactive, strategic way of preventing bribery and corruption.
And that makes things better for everyone, right?
Absolutely. A fairer, more transparent, more sustainable global economy.
Great point. Well, it sounds like the FCPA, even though it's complex, it's doing some good.
It is. It's there to promote ethical business,
Yeah.
make things fair for companies working internationally.
Well said. I think it's time to wrap up our FCPA deep dive. What are your final thoughts?
I'd say this. The FCPA, it's not just a bunch of rules to memorize. It's about making ethical choices, figuring out how to do business the right way in a complicated world. If you approach it with the right attitude, wanting to do the right thing, willing to learn, you can not only stay out of trouble, but you can build a better business.
That's a great way to put it. So to everyone listening, as you navigate the world of global business, remember to stay informed, to stay engaged, and most importantly, stay true to your values. Fighting corruption is something we all have to do, and we can all work together to create a more ethical future. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the FCPA. Until next time, stay curious.